so we can start. So first of all, I'm glad to see all you guys here at this amazing event. Hope you are enjoying everything so far. So first of all, let me introduce myself. My name is Sergey Shimko. I'm software engineer at Magento. I started to work at Magento from the Magento core team. Then I worked at Magento support. And currently, I participate in the Magento 2 project together with previous two speakers, Anton and Dmitry. We developed the next major version of Magento. The next 45 minutes, we are going to discuss interesting and difficult at the same time topic is how to develop low-coupled modules with Magento. Before getting in deep into the solutions, I would like to stop by on the definition. So what does coupling mean? Coupling or dependency, which is pretty much the same thing, means the degree to which each program module relies to each one of the other program modules in the system. So if the coupling is high, then the change in one part, in one module of the system, most probably leads to changing or fixing other parts or modules in the system. And the low coupling means that the change or even fault or error in one module in the system most probably won't affect other modules, other parts of our system, which is obviously what we want to achieve, what we want to have to see in our systems. Since we are talking about modules, let's think what can be, in general, the purpose or behavior of the module. Module, always any module, it ships some piece of functionality, some feature. It can be completely different feature, not related to any other features of the system. It can be extend or enhancement of existing features in the system. Modules can even override or replace some system behavior. Or, of course, real-world modules, they combine everything together and do pretty much everything. Like real-world difficult modules, they do everything that I said. The first thing that I would like to discuss with you, I called it injecting into existing functionality. This is the most general behavior of the module. It allows you to implement most of the features with this technique. So what do I mean under injecting into existing functionality? So let's say there is module A already existing in the system which implements some feature. And we're introducing module B, which needs to be executed or triggered at some point of execution of the module A. So it needs to be its logic needs to be kind of injected at some point of the module A. So it's pretty general task. So let's forget for a second about the help that our programming frameworks provide us as developers to implement this task. Let's think how would we implement this without any help from the modern or any kind of frameworks. Obviously, the easiest implementation, I called it hard-coded call implementation. There are two modules, module A and module B, and at the needed point of execution of module B, it contains just simply hard-coded call of module B in the source code. It simply calls module B. So what is wrong with such implementation? Looks fine, but it has some downsides. For example, it's easy to see that module A highly relies on even presence of module B in the system. So it's even impossible to remove module B from the system without breaking module A, which is obviously not good. So let's think how this implementation can be improved. The next improvement, the easiest improvement, obvious, can be exactly the same implementation, but instead of just calling one module from another, why don't just check its existence before calling this module? In such case, any module can be removed at any time from the system without breaking anything else. So looks like we solved the problem. But if to think a bit deeply, module A still knows about the module B. This knowledge is just not that strict. It's easy to feel it when we, let's say, rename module B. Just simply renaming module B leads to going into the source code of the module A and basically fixing this module. And as you remember from the definition, if change in one part of the system leads to change in other parts of the system, that's exactly what coupling is. So these modules anyway are coupled. Moreover, if we need to add one more module that needs to be executed at exactly the same point of integration at the point of module A, to do that, again, we have to go back to the source code of the module A and do, again, exactly the same conditional call of the module C, and again and again. So let's think how this implementation again be improved. What if to kind of invert relation between modules? What if module A just maintains the list of all modules that depend on it and provides interface for any module to register itself within this list? So C module B registers itself within the module A. At the needed point of execution, module A just loops this list of all registered modules and calls them one by one. In such a case, we achieved one important thing, that once this integration point is introduced, any number of modules can be easily integrated into existing points of integration. We can add any number of modules. But anyway, in this case, dependent modules, they have to register themselves within the main module. If to, let's say, rename this main module, it's easy to see that you have to go to all these dependent modules and edit them all, fix them all, which is, again, not what we want to have. So let's look at the solution that can solve all these problems. It's called publish-subscribe messaging pattern. The idea is pretty universal and simple, and it can be applied to almost any application. There are 2 points under this idea. There are senders of messages, and there are receivers of messages. Senders of messages don't know nothing about receivers. At the same time, receivers know nothing about senders. Both of them know only about messages. So in such a way, they don't know nothing about each other, but is still able to communicate. So how to understand this, let's look how our implementation would look like if to apply publish-subscribe pattern. I would like to highlight on this slide, on all previous slides, you've seen the framework part. But it was empty, like without anything, just gray framework part. It's normal for each application to have this framework part. The part that is not modular, that cannot be plugged in or plugged out or removed somehow, so any module can rely on its presence all the time. It's normal. Any application has such not removable part. The less this part is, the better, but any application has this part. So the main trick here is to move the responsibility of solving decoupling problem from the modules themselves, how we tried to do in previous examples, move this responsibility to the framework level. So see, in this picture, no arrows connect modules one to another. This means exactly that modules don't rely one on another. They still rely on the framework, but on previous slide, they also relied on the framework. So how it works? Module B uses the framework or some part of the framework, which I called here Messages Manager, to subscribe to them. How to subscribe to a message? Messages can be distinguished one from another in different ways. The easiest way, just by name, by having unique name. So module B subscribes to the message with the unique name it knows. And module A, at the needed point of integration, just publish this message to everyone who is subscribed. So in this case, any module can be removed because they have no even connections to each other. Moreover, any number of modules, once the integration point is introduced, can reuse this point without changing anything in the system. So this implementation is completely flexible. Okay, let's get back to Magento and look how Magento uses this pattern. This pattern is implemented in Magento, and it's called Magento Events. The only specific to Magento is that this implementation is object-oriented, since the Magento is object-oriented application. So the implementation is object-oriented, and such implementation implies having one single shared event manager across entire applications that is used to exchange messages. And the other specific is that instead of providing interface within the framework to subscribe to some event, in Magento, subscription is done through the configuration files. So instead of using some interface calling some method to subscribe, you can just declare your subscription in the module configuration. So let's look again at our example. It becomes a bit more complicated, more parts, but everything works exactly the same. So module B, it declares subscription in the file in configuration file that's shipped with the module, in config.xml file. At the needed point of execution, to dispatch event in Magento, we use Mage dispatch event call, which again uses framework. And okay, we'll get back to this trick with the configuration. For now, you can just simply think that when Mage dispatch event is called, the system goes through all modules, collects subscription, and calls them. Of course, it doesn't happen all the time. It's much more optimized. But the idea is this. Okay, and let's think what kind of coupling we can achieve using this publish-subscribe messaging pattern, and in particular Magento implementation, Magento Events. The trick here is that actual coupling, it depends on the code or on the business logic of these event handlers. You cannot say that the coupling is this or that. You have to look at each case, at each specific event handler. And want to highlight one more thing. Two modules are considered to be not coupled only in a case when they do not communicate at all. As soon as modules communicate in any way, they are coupled. Just degree of coupling depends. So the lowest type of coupling that can happen between modules, it's called message coupling. This happens if to implement event handler, it doesn't require to receive any external data from the dispatching points. If it's enough to just know the fact that event appeared to implement event handler without getting any data, then it's going to be message coupling. So knowledge only about the fact of event. But usually, of course, to implement event handlers, you need some data to implement this business logic effectively to do what you need to do your task. At this case, if event handler needs kind of short finite list of parameters of simple data types, and what is important, uses all of them to implement event handler, in this case, coupling is called data coupling. So short list of parameters of simple data types, and each of them is used. Okay, why to pass more parameters than to use? If you have just one subscriber for one event, it doesn't make sense. But usually you have much more subscribers. So as soon as you have two, one may need first half of the data, another one may need another half of the data. In this case, coupling automatically becomes stamp coupling. If either not all passed parameters are used, or parameters are passed as the data structure. Instead of separate parameters, it's just one parameter of complicated data structure. If event handler in its implementation uses some external or environment data, or retrieves some data from the environment, in object-oriented application, this environment can be, for example, registry. If event handler reads or retrieves something from application registry, coupling automatically increases to the common type of coupling. Another case of this common type of coupling in object-oriented applications is when data is accessed not through the methods, but properties are accessed directly, like having public properties and accessing data through the public properties. It's also common type of coupling. There are a couple more types of coupling. I didn't list them because they are not really applicable to object-oriented applications and to Magento in particular. Just wanted to show you there are about 2-3 of them. And the highest type of coupling is called content coupling. It's also not applicable to our application. It's applicable to only low-level programming languages like assembler, when you can really inject executable code into executable code. In this case, dependency is the highest. Well, anything can break your code, right? Okay. Right now, I would like to step a bit back and explain you the interesting ideas that exist in the scope of Magento 2 project regarding Magento Events. So I would like to share the proposal, which is internal document that investigates what can be changed or improved in the current implementation of Magento Events. Okay, so first idea of this proposal, it's called Introducing Strict Event Data Types. So what does it mean? Right now, Magento passes event parameters as a very flexible data structure, kind of array wrapped into the object. It's very flexible. You can pass any data as you need, as you like. You can add new data, you can modify it, but the downside is that it complicates understanding, complicates debugging, because you don't see actual fields. Actual fields, when you're implementing your event handler, you have to look and find this event dispatching point, figure out what parameters you can use, what are available. So sometimes it's much better when the list of these parameters is known. It's better to make this data type strict. So represent these event parameters as a class. So custom data type, which declares fields that are being passed to event handler. So this allows to, besides of understanding, it allows to control access to event parameters. If you defined only getters for the data, that means that when you implement in your event handler, you can only read data. You won't be able to write it, change it somehow, and affect other event handlers. Or if you need the field to be modifiable, you can introduce setter. That's easy. And the last interesting point is it gives ability introducing this custom event classes for each unique parameters combination, gives the ability to automatically generate the documentation for events, always up-to-date documentation. So what's the problem? Why it cannot be generated even right now in Magento 1? The information about the subscriptions to events is known. It's stored in configuration files in modules, so you can easily write script that goes through all modules, reads all configuration files, and just combine some HTML or whatever table, which module is subscribed to which events. The main problem is in event dispatching points. You can always find event dispatching point. They are always called mage dispatch event. You can find these points. You can even extract event names, which is good. So you can build this information. What you cannot do, you cannot recognize event parameters. So this documentation can be generated, but it won't be that useful without having parameters explanation. If to use event classes, documentation for them can be also automatically generated, for example, by PHP documenter, as for any other class. So all you have to do is just grab this class name from the source code, which is easy to do. So first parameter event name, second class name, and just generate the link to PHP doc documentation for this class. So it allows to generate complete documentation for events. The next improvement, proposed improvement, is called to use convention over configuration principle. Basically, this principle aims to simplify things a bit and to prevent developer from doing kind of routine things all the time, to repeat himself. So what does it mean? Let's look at Magento configuration right now. So event subscription looks like this in the Magento 1.x. So to subscribe to event, you have to declare some class, introduce some method which is going to be event handler, but it's not the subscription yet. To subscribe it to event, you have to add these lines to event configuration, which is in XML format, easy to understand. Now you got subscription. So how can this convention over configuration principle help us here? It allows us, by accepting two simple conventions, to release us from writing these lines in XML configuration. So the first convention would be, why not just use always the same, not completely the same, but the same class name, which includes module name, for all event subscriptions for the module. So module name plus, for example, module observer. Okay, it's the first convention. So choosing the default class name for all event subscribers, and then just simply to name the methods exactly the same as event names. So in this case, you don't have to declare this. It was kind of mapping in the configuration. So how to resolve this event name to handler name? You can just simply get this information from the PHP source code. The only problem here is that this underscore method names is a bit not standard naming, so it requires to change a bit event naming conventions. So just use lower camel case, and at the same time this proposal proposes to make event names more strict. Just introduces the parts that each event name should contain. Nice camel. Okay, and the next typical module behavior I would like to discuss with you, I called it integration with existing feature. So let's look into example of cron feature. So what is cron feature? It's time-based job scheduling. So we would like to have, let's say, it can be, let's name it cron module, that is able to determine that the needed time, to compare current time with the needed time where the job should be executed and actually execute this job. So it provides like a feature or service that can be, or we would like to reuse in other parts, in other modules in the system. So one module ships provide this feature, and any other module we would like to be able to use this feature. So let's look how this can be implemented in just simple way without getting help from the framework. It looks like this. There are two modules. One module introduces cron feature. Another module just simply schedules each job, and at the needed time, this job is executed. So again, our module starts to rely on this cron module because it has to schedule its job. Sometimes it's good. If this job is the main feature of our module and it really cannot exist without executing this job, it's fine. So this module should not work without the cron module. But usually this cron functionality is some additional. Module provides much more features than this kind of job, maybe some cleanup. Okay. So Magento provides pretty cool solution for this type of problems. And this solution is called Magento configuration files. So not just configuration files, but more the feature of merging these configuration files all together. This merging means two things. First, combining the data from all configuration files from all modules together, combining like adding nodes one to another. In XML format is kind of adding nodes. And another feature is overriding nodes. So how this helps to implement our cron job scheduling? Let's look again at our example. Let's say Magento module introduces the new section in our configuration, which provides nodes for specifying cron expression for matching time and the job that should be executed at this time. Then any module, like for example our module, to use this feature of job scheduling, it has to duplicate this node in its configuration file and declare the actual time it needs the jobs to be executed, and the actual job, some routine, some module, some method that should be called. So how does it work? At the needed point, like at the, let's say, Magento module runs each couple minutes, at all the time checks which from the scheduled jobs should be executed right now. So how would it retrieve the list of scheduled jobs? The trick is that in Magento framework doesn't allow to get access to module's own configuration. You never have access to your own configuration. You don't have access to configuration of somebody else either. You always have access to already merged configuration, which is merged from all enabled modules in the system. So in such a way, after merging, this node of scheduled job contains all the scheduled jobs from our module, from another module. So all the cron module needs to do is just read this configuration, loop over these scheduled jobs, compare cron time expression with the current time, and just execute jobs that match. And as you see, dependencies are so low, so any module can be removed at any time. Nothing will break. Magento configuration files are widely used in Magento. I just found a couple obvious examples like cache management. You can see cache management at admin panel, index management. So new cache types, new index types, they all are declared in configuration. In such a way, any module can introduce new cache type and new index type, the same with the product types. That's why we can introduce new product type with a new module, and a lot of other usages. Okay, so let's wrap up. During these 40 minutes, should be 40 minutes, we went through the publish subscribe messaging pattern, its implementation in Magento, which is Magento Events. I told you about some possible changes that you may see or may not see in the Magento 2. They are not implemented yet, but they're interesting. And the last thing was the feature of Magento configuration files. All right, before switching to questions, I would like you as extension developers to provide you some recommendations. First of all, I would like to encourage you to use these techniques that I explained to you today. Always use Magento configuration. If you feel that your module, your extension, provides some feature that can be useful for anyone, implement this feature using configuration, allows other people to integrate with your feature, to reuse your feature. As in the example that I provided, new cache types, index types. Always use events. Don't think that events is some kind of core feature reserved for the guys who work in Magento core. If you develop your own extension, your own module, don't hesitate to trigger your own events. Think how somebody may need to customize maybe a bit your extension, your module, and trigger these events in your extensions. And if you feel the last thing, if you feel that when you're developing one customization, another customization, and all the time you see that, you feel that the system lacks some event at some point, or some existing event lacks some data, some parameter that you always need, you can always submit request for adding this new event type or data to existing event through the Magento website. Thank you for your attention, guys. Time for questions. Yeah.
What's the easiest way to monitor events? Yeah. What's the easiest way to monitor events that are fired through the framework so that you can debug it?
Okay, good question. Let me think. Probably we won't have event to monitor events.
I mean, log in, whatever, right?
Yeah, I understand. The good way would be to have event that fires when fires event, but not goes deep into recursion, so it allows you to integrate with this event and write it into the log. But as far as I know, we don't have such event, because it's a pretty specific task. Okay, thank you for your question. Maybe it's good thing to improve.
You don't have a automatic logging system that as the messages are published into the bus, that they're automatically logged out at the same time?
No, they are not logged.
Okay.
Why do you need? It's
most commercial high-scale pub subsystems will do that automatically with just a configuration switch.
Because you are probably talking about a bit different usage about this publish-subscribe principle. When you have some distributed system and your message can be sent and not necessarily reach the destination because of the networking problems or something like that, of course it makes sense to log these messages. But with this approach, it happens in the memory in the same instance of the system. So message cannot reach the destination. It cannot reach. Of course, it's interesting to see which event handlers triggered, but they will be triggered. Thank you for your question. Yeah?
Is there an event priority scheme?
Event priority scheme, it's an interesting question. So right now, in fact, events fire in the order in which modules that subscribe to events are declared or are loaded. So basically it's kind of, okay, it's alphabetical order, but let's say it's random order. So, and no, they fire at the needed points. The question is about the order of executing event handlers. If there are a lot of event handlers subscribed to the same event. So basically order is defined, but you as developer should not know about it, shouldn't care about this order. In some situation, in some very specific situations, especially when the event data needs to be modified, or actually maybe it's the only case, then the order matters. But right now we are not trying to solve this problem, because as my personal opinion is that when you see this problem, it means that design of your event and your subscribers, it's not the best. So if the order start to matter, you have to probably revise your design and maybe not allow to modify event data, because it really would be difficult to debug and maintain this. So we don't plan to add the feature of defining the order of subscription, because it would be just a workaround. Thank you. Yeah?
Is there any disadvantage to using the event observer model in Magento, or is your statement that that should always be used for any customizations?
I didn't hear the beginning.
Is there a disadvantage to using the event observer model that would make you not use it, or are you saying that you should always use it for any customization?
As a disadvantage,
yes.
There is disadvantage is that this code with events is more difficult to understand, more difficult to debug, because it's really coupled loosely. So you don't see, it's difficult to see these relations because they are not direct anymore. So it doesn't make sense to use it everywhere, because the system, yes, it will be flexible, but who knows how the programmer will understand the system. So you should think kind of balance between not having and having too much, having enough events. So probably the strategy of adding events on demand, like we do, for example, one of the users of our source code, it's actually our developers. For example, enterprise developers. They also develop modules, enterprise modules for Magento. So if internally we feel that we cannot implement some feature, we need some event, we add these events. So we try these new events on ourselves. And also, you guys, any of you, can submit requests to add new events. Thank you.
Is there any performance trade-off with Magento
Of course, it would be slower than just direct call, because it's not direct. You're adding additional steps. So, of course, it's slower, but it's slower from the total, I don't know, page generation time. You don't have to think about this overhead. Yeah. Thank you. More questions? Okay, looks like no more questions. Or yes, please.
Well, I just kind of like to also lend my voice behind the idea of logging events. I would say that what I've done in the past, and I need to do that, is to go the source code for a dispatch event is open, and you can go right into it, and the similar functions in the same module, and call mage : log right on it.
Right. So for debugging purposes, you can temporarily just write this one line of code.
Yep. And it'll spit out a whole bunch of events because there's a lot that are called in every single.
Yeah, having this as general feature doesn't make much sense because this line can be easily added. Thank you. Had question?
Yeah, so you went out of your way to specify that this might not change. You are apparently having an internal campaign to get to the point that you go and do this a little bit more strict like you mentioned. So what are the chances, when will we know if the event process is going to change?
But it's not that significant change. It's more like just a bit simplification. So anyway, it doesn't change the concept a lot. So these changes kind of cosmetical or allow to a bit speed up your development. So you can write a couple lines of code less each time. But the concept, everything in general, it stays for sure. And as I said, this convention over configuration principle, it doesn't mean losing any flexibility. So even if we remove all this subscription from the configuration, we can always keep the feature to define this subscription in configuration. We can by default not have them to make our own modules follow these conventions, but to make it compatible with other modules. No, it can be 100% compatible. We can change our own modules, our own code, clean up these subscriptions from configuration, but at the same time, keep support of these nodes. So we won't have our nodes, but if you do, it will work. Thank you.
Well, it's not a true pub-sub model. It's an observer pattern.
No, observer pattern was at the slide when I called it maintaining the list of dependents. The difference, it's a good question. What's the difference between?
The true observer pattern is implemented Magento because your events get fired and the observers get registered. It's the reverse of it. The true pub-sub model is actually based on a bus. It's basically where the message gets written, and then whoever wants to read the message comes and reads. So it's basically for the first person who asked the question.
It doesn't need to be asynchronous, like you say. I can tell you the difference between the observer pattern and publish subscribe pattern. The only difference with observer pattern, subscribers always know to whom they subscribe, events of which entity. They know the entity and they can subscribe to any events of this entity. So they rely on existence of this entity. With publish subscribe pattern, you do not rely on existence of any entity. You subscribe to messages, not the messages of some entity. Yes, in object-oriented implementation, it's going to be single one entity event manager that will have all these events. But these events happen not inside this event manager entity. They are external, right?
Yeah, but in your implementation, it comes off as an observer pattern. It does not come off as a pub-sub. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, it comes just object-oriented. It's impossible to implement it in another way. With object-oriented implementation, it should look like this.
Basically trying to answer the question that the first person asked. There's no messaging service.
Yes, there is no, but publish-subscribe pattern is not about the technology that is used to transfer all these messages. It doesn't prescribe the time whether this message should come or the answer should come synchronously or asynchronously. The idea is to make publishers and subscribers not dependent, decoupled. That's it. Thank you. Yeah.
How do you compare this method with the Ajax?
Can you repeat?
How do you compare this method with the Ajax call? Yeah.
Which method?
Ajax.
Yeah, compare what with Ajax?
Because
Events
Ajax,
with
the event whatever method or decoupling method, yeah, with Ajax.
Okay. It's a bit different thing because whatever I showed you, it happens on the server side. On each request, application executes, and everything happens at the server side in the memory. So all these messages, they are exchanged through the memory. With the Ajax, I mean, it's a bit different. So it's client side. Yeah, I mean, you can use the same patterns to implement your client side, implement your Ajax requests.
I think some of the publisher subscribers, you also can implement by Ajax, right? Yeah.
But I didn't cover that. Okay. Cover just the server side. So it's a bit of topic. Thank you. Okay, thank you everybody. Thank you for coming.